So Goran, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here at the Swedish Ethics Council, and greetings from the German Ethics Council, which I can represent, and the third former or present member of the European Group on Ethics as well. So, did you left me anything to talk about? Because I had so many points which I also wanted to cover, but that gives me the opportunity to focus on the one single point I want to make the take-home message for you, talking about the shift from data protection to data sovereignty. And this might fit into this idea of balancing these very different values in order to look at the very heart, which always has to be taken more than seriously into account, the human being and its dignity. So when I now talk about data sovereignty, I will present the outcome of an opinion the German Ethics Council has issued exactly 1 year ago, having dealt with the topic of big data and healthcare for many years. And what we when we focused on big data, you can copy-paste everything to the field of AI as well, because many of the problems given within the field of big data are on a, let's say, higher technical level, also addressed in the field of AI. So I can really rush through my first slides, as Jaron, you tackled many of these issues. We are in a new era of human history, which the Italian, British philosopher Luciano Floridi called the Fourth Revolution, and he also created a new term which I like, which means we live in the on-life world, which means we never can live like in former times offline, because also if you have the feeling you were offline, you are still embedded by an environment, and you also are shaped by an environment which is a priori an online environment. So we can't switch anymore between offline and online, and therefore he created this new term of on-life world. And this on-life world is shaped by these technical preconditions of ubiquitous sensing, big data, cloud-based networking, algorithm with this predictive probabilistic intention. And Jaron also mentioned the well-known process of collecting, storage of the huge amount of data, looking for pattern look for pattern recognition, which yields predicting the most. I can't read my own. It is. So I've bad glasses. Predictable events, decisions, and actions, which then leads to recommendations in a given situation. All this is very well known, and I just want to raise your awareness to the facts, and this was also mentioned, that very often we not appropriately distinguish between, on the one hand, probability and reality, and between correlation and causality. I think this is one of the most fallacies when it comes to the transformation to big data and AI. Stratification, especially in the field of precision medicine, is understood as individuality or as personal patterns. And very often, data are and recontextualized. And of course, the meaning of information or the meaning of a data which creates the information depends on the given context. And if you decontextualize, then of course you also shift the information, and this very often is also not taken into account. So having this in mind, nevertheless, we face a revolution when it comes to the field of so-called health data. And what is perhaps one of the most important issues to consider is that we cannot distinguish as informer times between, on the one hand, the very sensitive health data and all the other data. In times of the digital transformation, every data can become highly relevant to your health condition, to your health prediction, which means the importance of every data has to be also predicted as a relevant health data. And therefore, we face this impact of digitalization in very different fields on the first, at the first glance, and in the second glance, we can see that all these data and its meaning are merging. Data from public health, ambient-assisted life, P4 medicine, which is the predictive, preventive, personalized, participatory medicine. If it works, we can discuss. We have a huge workload in research and healthcare provision, services and industry. We get and we use data from all these and variables which we now continuously take on or within our body. So we self-track ourselves in this movement of life logging, and of course also we have this exchange and tracking and counseling and nudging of data with impact to the health status in the social media. Many of you are aware of this app that Facebook now has introduced, that it can, by correlation, not by causality, give a warning if you are in risk of committing suicide. And then you get this added here on, here in the next slide. Here you can see this app that you get on your iPhone, in your Facebook app, this warning, oh, we realized you have problems. Should we give you advice? Should we inform Facebook friends of you, or should we give you the first 10 hints not to commit suicide? So all of these data are merging, and what drives us nervous is the fact that in this on-life world, topics, issues, data confluence which haven't been belonged together for many, many years, which were separated in different spheres and can now create not only new helpful information, but which might have an impact, a serious impact on your own self-understanding, on your lifestyle, and on your inclusion within a society. And against this background, on the one hand, taking into account all the given opportunities by this transformation to the digitalization of health, healthcare, and medicine. And on the other hand, also being aware of all these aforementioned risks when it comes to your own self-determination embedded within a society, which always leads to risk of social exclusion. The German Ethics Council looked for balancing these opportunities and these risks. And we looked for a governance strategy which not only highlights the risk, which usually is expected Ethics Council do, but which also takes into account the opportunities. Because ethics is not only about responsibility or reflecting on the responsibility on acting, but also on the responsibility of refraining from sensitive actions. And therefore, we saw and we recognized all these opportunities, and we also were aware that these opportunities can't be kept if we just refer to the given regime of, I would say, old-fashioned data protection, which also, to my mind, drives the GDPR. So why? I am convinced that the GDPR approach in general and the data protection approach is old-fashioned and will not face the opportunities and also the risk of a big data and AI age. To my mind, the data protection approach is, if you just look at the principle of data minimization, purpose limitation, and informed consent, you see that these devices of the general approach are mostly, as I call it, input-oriented. So it is an input-driven approach. And most of you remember the 25th May of last year. We all clicked the blocks, do you accept now visiting this homepage or this URL? We all clicked and said, no one of us checked what was in the terms of condition. We just ran through it and accepted all the terms of condition. So it was just input-oriented, and we then gave our self-determination to the providers of these websites. And we thought it would be more appropriate to move to a more output-oriented approach where the data subject still holds its self-determination throughout the entire process of the data processing. And this approach in mind, we then looked for a comprehensive governance strategy how to implement such an approach of more output-oriented data sovereignty. And here we issued an, as we called it, multi-layered, multi-dimensional approach, which takes into account, on the one hand, elements of using the opportunities and potentials of nevertheless protecting the individual freedom and privacy, also fostering justice and solidarity, and finally taking responsibility and trust into account. And our data sovereignty definition is understood in the following way, that data sovereignty means there is, and I quote, because it's a really important quotation, a responsible shaping of informational freedom in a manner appropriate to the risk and opportunities presented by big data and at AI is the central ethical and legal goal in confronting the challenges and opportunities presented by big data and AI. The notion of shaping informational freedom builds on the concept of informational self-determination. It is not grounded in exclusive rights analogous to property, but rather in the authority to determine for oneself with which content one chooses to relate to the wider world. Shaping informational freedom in this sense refers to the interactive development of one's personality in a networked world and is characterized by the capacity to intervene effectively in the constant flow of personally relevant data on the basis of one's personal preferences, and so on. 1 minute? 1 minute, okay. Why? I had the impression that I did not talk as long, but okay. So then, finally, I just can recommend you to look at this opinion, which you will find on the internet, and you can go into detail to reflect on the, I guess, 60 different recommendations we gave, ordered by these different elements. And perhaps just to pick up one essential, just to focus on this element of data sovereignty. Very often I was asked, is it technically feasible to go ahead in this manner? Lucky us, we had the former engineering director of Google Europe within our team, so he helped us to create a governance idea which is backed by technical solutions. And I liked his proposal of integrating on the programmatic interfaces so-called data agents, which allows the data subject to follow the flow of the use of his or her data, or the entire flow of data. And of course, no one of us is able to observe and surveil this entire flow. So the next step is to set up a system of so-called data trustees who, in favor of our interests, is in charge for following this flow or route of our information, so that not in every second you follow your own data, but via an app you are able to provide the data trustees with your personal values, that when it comes to a point where it becomes relevant to you, a political party uses your personal data, which you do not want them to use, you can jump in. And of course, this is always conducted by machines, and only perhaps on a second or a fifth or sixth level by human beings. But it gives you, in general, the controllability. Data sovereignty means to keep the controllability of the individual in an age of digital transformation in order to keep the human dignity as informational self-determination. This, to our mind, must be at the very heart of all our balancing of the very values we also have to keep in mind a plurality of. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think data protection and data sovereignty are very important topics. We will come back to them in the discussion. So thanks a lot.